I'm Jules Bugiel, and this week I'm going to be talking about the flotilla to Gaza, come back to Montreal, and a Permanent Peoples Tribunal that asks, did Canada commit genocide?
I'm Christopher Curtis, and we're going to be talking about cyberbullying inside Quebec's sovereignist movement, and we're going to have a guest who will speak to us about her experience inside a prison for children. Welcome to the week Is Rover. Cyberbullying in Quebec's sovereignty movement. Let me explain. Last week, a nonpartisan group called OUI Québec published a report on what it will take to make Quebec a country. They consulted with experts from across civil society, teachers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, trade unions, chambers of commerce, you name it. The overwhelming consensus was this: the sovereignty movement needs to be more inclusive. Concretely, that means toning down the anti-immigration rhetoric and building bridges with communities who feel scapegoated by our politics. It means coming up with a unifying message and an ambitious societal project. You might think that's a pretty uncontroversial idea, but you would be wrong. Supporters of the Parti Québécois, which is never once mentioned in the report, by the way, immediately started attacking OUI Québec. This all began with, I really don't want to use this word to describe him, but the intellectual Mathieu Bock-Côté, who in a post on Facebook called OUI Québec useful idiots, unwittingly working for the cause of federalism. Bock-Côté said he was outraged that the group would attack the independence movement on the cusp of what is sure to be a PQ election win. He also shared a post from a PQ supporter who said, quote, "So the party that is leading in the polls should take advice from the back of the pack?" In other words, the increasingly conservative PQ will decide what the independence movement is and how the independence project should be achieved. For the record, the PQ is polling at about 30% right now. That's significantly less than the 50% plus one they'll need to win a referendum. In this context, maybe calling allies in the movement useful idiots isn't the best strategic decision. But I digress. I spoke to someone from OUI Québec earlier this week, and he said they've basically gone into hiding to recuperate from days of unending hateful messages and threats in their inbox. These are people who, just like the PQ, want to make Quebec into a country. Let's talk about it.
I will say, if you're going to call me an idiot, at least call me useful.
I like that. Okay. We will definitely, every time we call you an idiot, we'll be like, but she's useful. She's handy.
I want to be good for something.
Yeah. She's always, you need a couch to move? Call Jules. By the way, Jules, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the animosity, the little sort of civil war within the sovereignty movement has been playing itself out for decades, right? It's not like, we tend to see PQ and sovereignty as meaning exactly the same thing, but like they've always been they were in the past, a big tent party. You've got a conservative wing, you've got a progressive wing. The progressive wing kind of broke off to form Québec Solidaire. The conservative wing kind of broke off to form the ADQ and the CAQ in the 90s and 2000s. So what's left is this party that's trying to build its strength back up after a series of defeats, and it feels like they've only figured out how to build the anti-progressive, the sort of regressive part of the part, like that they've nailed. They have that on lock, and their entire strategy seems to be, we will not win without these conservative voices, so we have to excite their conservative passions. But in doing that, you're alienating all of these people who feel as though, hey, I want a French-speaking nation. I want for us to determine our future within Canada, but I maybe don't necessarily want to do it by alienating young people, by alienating immigrants, and like that's kind of what the PQ has become to a lot of people.
Yeah, it was interesting, the report that OUI Québec put out that you mentioned. There's a quote in there. They talked to all these civil society groups, and one person is just quoted as saying basically, like, we can't be dividing people. We have to be bringing people into this united movement, this big tent movement, separatism 2.0, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you say, like, okay, the PQ has this regressive thing on lock, because I do local news. I don't really do too much at the National Assembly. But, when they've been in opposition to the CAQ, I think they have taken some more progressive social positions on various economic issues, social issues. They've pushed the CAQ on just underfunding the social safety net in various ways, right? So there is that kind of duality for me, not being from here, not growing up here, it's been interesting to come and see like, oh, okay, you can have a sort of anti-migrant stance, but for the Québécois de souche working class, you can kind of fight in a way that's almost a bit progressive. I don't know. I want you to help me make sense of that.
It's really hard to nail down their politics in a left-right. Like traditionally, the Parti Québécois was a workers' party. The unions always endorsed them in every election. They, almost all of the really great aspects about living in Quebec come because of the sovereignist movement. Like we have affordable childcare because of a Parti Québécois government. Our universities are much more inexpensive than in the rest of Canada because of Parti Québécois policies. They did carve out, there's like this golden era that they carved out of like a social progressive state in North America. But they after losing the referendum, they started kind of exciting that the conservative part of their base. And they started thinking like, well, the only way to win, like the only way to change anything is to be in power. And the way to be in power right now is, they embrace the conservative side of their movement. Like Lucien Bouchard, who used to be a progressive conservative in Ottawa, he joined, he became the PQ leader. And then eventually this party that's super pro-union goes and they elect Pierre-Carl Péladeau. He owns Québécois Media and he is notoriously a strikebreaker. When he took over at Journal de Montréal, he broke their union. When he took over at Videotron, he broke their union. And the idea was like, well, we need to win. We need to win and we need something in someone different. And I think that you've made so many compromises in order to attain power in Quebec City that like those compromises are going to cost you that 50% you need for a referendum. Like it's hard to get 50% of Quebecers to agree on anything. Something so deep and potentially divisive, like you really do have to have a plan. And the sovereignty movement in the 90s was really a coalition of different groups. It was the Parti Québécois, but there were other more conservative elements and other more progressive elements that came together. I don't think the party today is there's a lot of online bullying. Like these 50 groups that were consulted, they all did so anonymously because they knew that if they put their name out there, they would be flooded with hateful messages. So I think there's an energy behind the party right now, and the party is doing well in the polls, but that energy comes at the expense of mass appeal.
Well, yeah, my question about the PQ is just like, how much do people actually want to vote for them versus they don't want to vote for the CAQ? Is it a question of PSPP being a star candidate or just, the CAQ kind of not, I don't know, people being tired of the CAQ, right?
I think that's like the story of Canadian politics, right? Like we don't really vote from like we're like in hockey, we're playing the trap. Like we're not necessarily playing to win, we're playing to not lose. And you look to the party that will not lose in the best way. And yeah, I think people will park their vote somewhere as an act of protest. I mean, Quebec en masse voted in the federal election in 2011. They voted for the NDP, right? Like in the Orange Wave. And a lot of those same voters who voted for progressive Jack Layton probably supporting either the CAQ right now or the PQ. Like it's very hard to put politics in this province in a box because people can hold certain progressive ideas like everyone deserves access to childcare and certain conservative ideas like keep those immigrants out of our country. Like it's people contain multitudes, and I think the PQ is no exception. But the party has become increasingly divisive. When PSPP emerged as the leader, he was very popular at first, but I think the more people got to see his approach to politics, the more people's views of him hardened. I think his unfavorability is higher than any politician in Quebec except for conservative leader Éric Duhaime. 47% of voters don't like him. That's a problem. Like, if you need to win over half of the province in a referendum, like, if 47% already either oppose you or strongly oppose you, like, it's really, there's not a lot of people who don't have an opinion on PSPP right now. Like, there's not much of a middle anymore. He has 34% support, which in Quebec is not bad, but you have 47% of people who don't like you. And I don't know what they're going to do, but I feel like this party has a ceiling. and I think they might be hitting it.
I don't know. I'm curious because he is a good politician, right?
Yeah.
He's a good politician.
He knows how to get on TV, and he knows how to get free media. And whether it's for controversy or not, like people don't realize that when you're complaining about PSPP on social media, he's getting name recognition, and that's not nothing. But you're sorry, I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, I'm curious about the OUI Québec thing, right? Like they opened this cafe on the Plaza Saint-Hubert. They're expanding, hosting rallies. Definitely, I'm seeing them on Instagram Reels. I'm seeing them on Tout le monde en parle, or maybe not OUI Québec, but I don't know. Kinji 00 went on. He has his like very very Gen Z, pro Quebec sovereignty music, which I guess like PSPP isn't listening to. Maybe he should.
It's not on his shuffle, no.
I listen to it as an Anglo in Montreal, so I feel like he can definitely take a moment to like put on the Spotify. But my question is just like, I read the OUI Québec report, and like I came out of it not really knowing still what they stood for. Like, I was like, okay, this is more progressive, right, than PQ. It's not anti-migrant. It's like, we got to build this big tent movement. Yeah. You're here now. What are you going to do about it? It's about decentralizing power and getting people connected. Like, it seems to be more in the way of like participatory democracy, rebuilding the social safety net. Like, these are kind of strands. But because they're saying we're doing this broad-based consultation, it's not like we have a vision and an ideology that we're putting forth. This is our plan. Let's follow it. This is what a different Quebec could be. It's like, we need a vision of what a different Quebec could be. We need a Quiet Revolution 2.0. But we're not yet at the stage of saying what it will be. And that kind of is something that has, I don't want to say giving me pause, but it's like, it's making me look at OUI Québec in this way of not entirely being sure of what
they're
they
being very careful. The report is very careful not to offend anyone. And when you do that, it's going to sound like gobbledygook. It's going to sound like anything, or nothing, right? It sounds kind of bland, but
it's a good blend.
It's a good blend. There's a few things in there, like we have as a society, we've become, in Quebec, we are terrified of taking on big projects. Because we got burned with the Olympic Stadium, because we've been burned with a lot of other infrastructure projects, because of all the corruption, people are worried that we can no longer, that we've outsourced all of our expertise to the private sector. And that's true. And so I think it's hard to sell people on the message of like, we need to maybe raise taxes in certain brackets. We need to spend more money on social services. We need to build up the infrastructure of a social city. That's not an exciting promise, and it's a promise that takes years to deliver. And I think a lot of our politics today, I mean, if you look at all of the economic platforms from, say, the big three parties, CAQ, PLQ, PQ, it's always like, a family of three will save $700 on, like, $700 is meaningless today, right? Like, if your kid can't see a doctor when they're sick, which, like, look, I have a kid. If she's really sick, we're not going to the emergency room because maybe we're going to miss 2 days of work. So you go and you pay $300 to see a private doctor. And like, that is the world that we live in now. And that's the world we live in, whether the CAQ is in power, whether the PQ is in power, or whether the PLQ is in power. We've only seen a deterioration of our services. Maybe under certain parties it's been slower than under others, but I think it's really hard to get people excited and energized about the government and this society being able to take on big, meaningful projects. And so, like, instead of speaking to the whole of society, which I think OUI Québec is trying to do that, and you present them with this sort of like, let's please everybody message, that ultimately rings hollow, right? It's like neoliberalism, like, let's be everything to everyone. Whereas the PQ is a party that is driven, like, we were talking about this earlier, there are 42,000 dues-paying members of the Parti Québécois. That is, first of all, that's great for fundraising. They raise more money than all the other parties. They have more members than the other two big parties have combined. So in a way, that's amazing because it makes your campaign a lot easier. You know where you're going to stop to refuel, to get that energy. You know who to visit. You have people who are going to knock on doors for you, but they're hardliners. They're paying to be in the PQ. They're people who have been in the movement since they were sort of young Maoists in the 1960s and 70s, and now they're slightly older and they have a more conservative, more defensive, more afraid view of the world. And I mean, that's a very long question, answer to your question, but I think that's sort of like, that's the two strategies. Try for broad appeal or get your base really, really excited, which the PQ has. Like, if you criticize PSPP online, you'll be overwhelmed. Like, Marie-Élaine Coton is a doctor. She's a psychiatrist who works with patients in the North. She does amazing anti-colonial work. She takes care of people. She helps people heal from trauma. She's a good person. She also has political opinions. She has a page where she talks about politics. On her Facebook page where she talks about politics, she doesn't identify as a doctor anywhere. But people constantly go to that. Supporters of the PQ, they use the fact that she's a doctor. And in the last year or year and a half, 7 people, and mostly supporters of the Parti Québécois, Jean-François Lisée, the former PQ leader, was one of them, have written to the Order of Physicians, and they have basically said this woman needs to be reprimanded because she's bringing disrepute to the entire profession, which is really fucked up. And when you think about that, like, that's what they do to their political enemies. There's no, I mean, of course, the people who joined the consultations are going to be anonymous. They don't want to get that experience. Of course, the report is going to be like the do backflips, not to offend anyone, because you don't want that treatment either. I wrote earlier this year, I wrote a piece about how aggressive the PQ supporters are online. You can imagine what happened to me next. Like, you're getting a lot of like, hi, I know you've never talked to me, but I just want you to know I fucking hate you. Like, thanks a lot, Jean. Appreciate it. Please send some more. And he did. That was a super long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
I'm excited for Quiet Revolution 2.0.
I'm excited for when we're going to stop calling things 2.0. Like, I feel like that's a very, like, that was like edgy in the 2010s. We got to come up with maybe 2.5, 3.0, maybe do the Elon Musk thing, Quiet Revolution X.
Yeah.
Let's not do that. But no, I think that we are, like, as much as this place gives me anxiety and as much as this whole conversation like gives me anxiety, I love Quebec. I love speaking French. I love the little differences of our society in North America. And I would love the idea of all of us working together to make sure that we have a fair and just and righteous place to live.
Beatings, rubber bullets, tasings, sexual assault. This is some of the violence that members of the most recent flotilla to Gaza say they suffered at the hands of Israeli forces.
Free Palestine!
Activists forced to kneel, their hands tied, as the Israeli national anthem plays. Israeli Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir released footage on X Wednesday of him taunting detained activists from a Gaza-bound flotilla.
Activists with the Global Sumud and Freedom Flotilla were captured by Israel on May 18th and held for 3 days before being released. Last Saturday, I was at Trudeau Airport when 2 of the 3 Montrealers in the flotilla finally returned home.
Ribs broken, rubber bullets, wounds, knife wounds, all of that just happening because we dared say that the genocide on Gaza is not acceptable.
Hablo Tayef, a McGill IT worker, activist, and poet, and a former board member where I work, CKUT, says he had his hand sliced open by a guard while helping hand out water to other prisoners. Canada has called this treatment appalling and grave, egregious abuse, and says those responsible must be held accountable. Those responsible. That's who exactly? Prison guards? Itamar Ben-Gvir, who mocked flotilla members on video? Or Israel itself? What's Canada prepared to do to actually see that accountability through?
I guess I was wondering, like, why the outrage from the federal government now? This is not the first time Canadian activists have been beaten and illegally detained. It's not the first time they've been snatched from international waters. Why is the government suddenly so offended?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we saw the tweet from Mark Carney. We saw Anita Anand also give a condemnation. I mean, both of those people went to basically their Israeli counterparts at this international conference this week and said, this isn't okay. This is unacceptable. And they
Didn't
haven't
Canada
really
write a strongly worded letter with New Zealand? Mm-hmm. Don't forget the ultimate alliance of Canada and New Zealand.
Yeah, but you're right. They haven't really done it in the past. There was a flotilla last fall, right? That September, October. And we heard a lot about Greta Thunberg. But there were Canadians who were part of that flotilla. Nima Machouf, a doctor here in Quebec, very well known, very well respected. She was part of that flotilla effort. We didn't see the same response from the Canadian government then. And there were similar stories that came out. I think what has shifted at this time is Ben Gvir's video, right?
Yeah.
And it's not even that there's anything really that extraordinary that's on tape there. You see people, their heads on the floor, their hands tied behind their hands. People are being forced down 1 or 2 times by guards. But it's this attitude, I think, that this gloating attitude of, we're the landlords. I mean, that's a really interesting statement to start with, first of all. But the difference is not so much in the treatment, but I mean, Canada
it's in the marketing.
It's in the marketing, yeah, because it's like you don't want to appear weak that this other country, like we all hear the stories, right? But you don't want to be too egregious with it. Then all the countries who are sending nationals, then they look really bad, right? At the same time, we've heard statements, but the flotilla activists, they say they want much more than statements. I was at YUL on Saturday, and Ehab was saying, a condemnation is just, like, we're well past the point where that's enough at this point.
Yeah. I gotta say, it was weird. It's weird, like, you see horrible things coming out of Gaza, coming out of Israel, and you but then you see, like, I've met Ehab before. I've seen him at protests. I've spoken to him. He's a very nice person. He's a very gentle person. I spoke to some people who knew him when I was trying to find out how he was doing. And they described this, like, gentle, kind, soft-spoken man. And it's this thing of, like, I know this guy in real life. And I'm seeing a video of him being released from prison in Israel. And it really hits home in a way that it's stupid. Because, like, I know that this is happening. But my heart feels differently when I see someone that I know. And it seems so much more real. And I just wonder how much of this is, like, the politicians finally realizing that, like, there are a lot of Canadians here with a connection to what's happening over there. Like, there are people here, I mean, who have suffered during the trip, but, like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what it is that's caught. The video, I think, is the entire thing, right? It's marketing, right? It's like, I remember President Obama after they killed bin Laden was like, people were asking, like, why don't you show the body? Why don't you, like, and he said something like, well, in America, we don't spike the football. And it was very much like, it's not about killing people on foreign land, like in a secret, borderline illegal mission. It's the marketing of the mission. It's like, don't gloat. Like, you can do all this stuff. You can hold them in stress positions. You can treat them like garbage. Don't film yourself doing it.
Well, yeah, I mean, when there has been a crisis in American foreign relations, the way that their soldiers treat people, the torture that's happened overseas, it's when footage has come out, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing about Gaza is that we saw, like, iPhone footage, but journalists have been so systematically killed and people have been denied access to the Gaza Strip. Like, you talk about foreign journalists, that's been the story of the war, but more recently, it's NGOs. It's 37 NGOs, MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, like, they are not operating. They're not sending foreign people into Gaza. I should say they have Gazan teams made of Palestinian nationals. But it's just, the goal of the flotilla is, like, all eyes on Gaza.
Yeah.
But what makes it hard to be, I don't know if believed is the right word. I don't know that it's a question of belief, but just to have what's happening be actionable is, at this point, just the lack of eyes on it.
Yeah.
That's the point of the flotilla, right? There's a kind of twofold mission, what they're trying to do.
And people often criticize the flotilla. Like, critics of the flotilla will say, well, they don't really want to bring aid. They're not really trying, like, they know the aid's not going to make it there, so that it's just a performance. It's just theater. How would you counter that?
Yeah, I mean, Israel calls it a PR stunt, right? And it's true, there is a symbolic amount of aid on these boats. There is humanitarian aid, but it's not enough to really make a dent. As a drop in the bucket, right? But I think it's interesting, this idea that like a performance is somehow less real, right? Less actionable. Because, yeah, seeing these videos of Ehab, like before he came to Canada, back when he was in Turkey, he was like first deported. You know, this is somebody that I've met going to protests, covering, the press conference for when the flotilla came. This is someone I've spoken to over the years. And you just see someone you don't know well, but you know, look 10 years older, look so just depleted. And whether or not it's a performance that is having some truth to it, which is just the conditions that these people are going through. What the flotilla participants are alleging is like in line with what we hear from the UN, report after report, the special rapporteur on torture. It's just like reams of documentation.
The New York Times, which never ever criticize Israel. They released this scathing report into the systematic rape of Palestinian prisoners inside those prisons, and you wonder if this is how they treat white, well-meaning people from the West when they come and try, how are they treating Palestinians in those jails? I mean, I think for a lot of people, you keep wondering okay, what is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back? And I don't think that's going to happen politically yet. People on the ground, the polling is overwhelmingly in favor of Canadians recognize this is a genocide. Canadians have gone from having favorable views of Israel to having overwhelmingly negative views about Israel. But our political class, it seems, at the highest level anyways, are just incapable. All of this summoning of Israeli officials, what has it actually accomplished? They did it when there was a Canadian aid worker who was killed by a missile strike during an aid operation. And again, they summoned the Israeli ambassador and they wrote a strongly worded letter, but what does that amount to in the end?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's that's diplomacy for you.
Yeah.
That's diplomacy, is having a meeting with somebody you hate and saying, I wish you wouldn't do that. And they're well, I wish you wouldn't do this. I wish you wouldn't send these Hamas supporters that are your citizens, right? And yeah, obviously activists want more. They say we're past the point where an arms embargo on Israel is enough because there's weapons getting through. From General Dynamics' plant in Valleyfield, Quebec, there's reporting that shows that through the United States, these ballistics parts are ending up in Israel. You can see that on the U.S. Department of Defense procurement website, right?
The 155 millimeter shells that they use in their tanks and some of their artillery weapons. The fuel for those shells is produced at the General Dynamics factory, and there's going to be a $600 million expansion to that factory, entirely funded by the U.S. Army. And again, well, why even have a border at this point? Are we just we're just junior partners in the genocide? Or?
But what people are calling for is an economic boycott, a more of a political boycott, something that's going beyond arms and saying we are imposing more significant sanctions. And yeah, I just don't think right now there's an appetite for that, at least in the Canadian government. Yeah. I would say in the Canadian public, it seems yes, right? But I mean, if you want to talk about Carney, he's wanting to shake hands and make deals. At the same time, he's been harsher towards Israel than Trudeau has.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting. I think he doesn't want to look like a fool, but he wants to be wise. I don't know. I don't cover national or international, so I don't really know. But bringing it back to Quebec, it's interesting because here we have a kind of history politically of pretty strong pro-Palestinian mobilization, I would say, in the province. And yet at the same time, we have a government that's opened an economic office in Tel Aviv during the conflict. We have the Caisse de Placement du Québec, our pension fund here in Quebec that is investing
massively in companies that either are directly involved in the armaments or they're providing technology, or it's insane. And
to their credit, the federal government somewhat recently put out the statement that was saying if you are a company that is operating in these legal settlements. Like, you could be in violation of international law. So this is something that activists have been calling for. There are small steps being taken.
Yeah, and the recognition of the state, like it's not nothing. It is like, for a country as conservative in their dealings with the international community as Canada is, it is something.
But practically on the ground, like, Ihab was saying that when he and the other prisoners were first released, like, there were some lawyers from the Israeli NGO Adala who were there to greet them, like these hundreds of prisoners. But, you know, Canadian consular officials were not there.
Yeah.
And so this is something Anita Anand has said, was that Israel was in violation of the Vienna Convention, which I just learned existed. It's there's many Vienna Conventions on consular services. Yeah, who knew? But it's basically this rule that says, like, hey, if you have a national that's being detained, imprisoned, what have you, your consular officials should be able to talk to them, should be able to visit them. She's saying that was not respected, which, like, yeah, you know, we knew that. But what Ehab was saying is, like, okay, if this is such a big deal, if Canada cares so much about this, where were they the minute when we were being released? They were there in Turkey to interview us about what we went through. But where were they on the ground, like, when we really needed it most? So there's a way in which Canada is saying, like, Israel is stopping us from providing for our citizens in the way that we need to. The treatment is egregious. It's abominable. Carney said it was abominable. But it's like, I think people who are within the movement have expressed to me, like, they just don't believe this. They just don't think that that the
empty words.
It's empty words. Yeah. That's what they say.
I think, like, I was wondering, like, it's impossible to have a conversation about this, and especially Itamar Ben-Gvir, without mentioning this week in Montreal, there was a protest and they hanged Itamar Ben-Gvir in effigy, right? Like there was a printout of his face, and certain politicians, like the Liberal MP Anthony Housefather, I think even Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, the mayor, they describe this as they're hanging a Jewish person in public, and that's what this protest is. Like, it feels like they're intentionally misinterpreting the situation to make it far worse than it is. And their reaction to this symbolic hanging of a politician who wants, you know, who passed the controversial "let's hang Palestinians but not our citizens" law, like, that guy, the hanging of that guy gets more of a reaction than our own brothers and sisters and family members who go over there, and, like, one of them literally has a stab wound in his hand, and they endured such horrible things, and there's people being murdered across the world. Like, we're angrier about that than the murder, and it feels like it's breaking my brain.
What's interesting, so it's Montreal for Palestine. This is the group that you're referring to, who, you know, they have videos on their social media of this as well. It's part of a protest. They're like a smaller group of pro-Palestine protesters in the city than, let's say, the Palestinian youth movement. Yeah. But they are one of the main players, and they do a lot of regular protests. And it is interesting whenever one of these things gets picked up by the media outrage cycle. Because, yeah, it's Ben-Gvir, right? And he's wearing a kippah, and people are saying, you know, like, it's a Jew being hanged. But to the protesters' side, they're saying, well, we also were hanging an effigy of Donald Trump and an effigy of Netanyahu. These are people we consider war criminals. It makes me think of Jean Boulet when the guillotine, when they guillotined the papier-mâché Jean Boulet, Quebec's labor minister.
Like, that's a Christian. Well, I know there's different reasons. You know, Christians are not a minority, and they're not the victim of hate crimes. And I think that's very, very important. Like, there's a difference. But.
Yeah. But what's interesting about that protest is they're, like, very actively picking out, these are the three people who are responsible. Yeah. These are the people who have power in the situation. And it made me think about Canada's response, because, you know, when this happened, the flotilla, I asked Global Affairs Canada for a statement, and you've seen this also in the statement of these politicians, right? They're saying, you know, those responsible must be held accountable. But who's responsible? Yeah, is it the specific prison guards on this prison ship, right? Are those the people who were allegedly routinely beating each prisoner as they were entering, sometimes assaulting sexually, sometimes tasing people, sometimes stabbing them, right? Are those the people who should be held accountable? Is it Ben-Gvir? Is it leadership within these institutions? Is it Israel itself? So it's just interesting to me, like, I feel like we're not having the conversation where these politicians are being pushed. Like, who is actually responsible here? And that's what the flotilla is trying to do. Like, it's a PR stunt, but the goal of the stunt, I think, is to make us ask those questions. Like, who's responsible for putting a blockade, a complete naval blockade on Gaza since 2007? Who's responsible for, like, slowing aid flows to a halt at some point, and then taking over, politicizing, if you believe the UN, the control of aid distribution in the Gaza Strip? Like, who's responsible? And, you know, it's clear if you listen to the movement, they have an answer for that. But it's interesting that politicians are kind of getting away with doing the diplomacy thing of just, you know, or the journalism thing, right? Of just saying, like, bombs were dropped, you know, like, people were tortured. Okay, well, like, who? Who and by whom and why? Yeah. Anyway.
Over 3,000 minors were strip searched in Quebec's youth protection centers last year. What is a youth protection center? Well, it's basically a prison, but for kids. And inside those kid jails, an average of 8 children are subjected to strip searches every day. When Social Services Minister Lionel Carman was confronted with this fact last week, he chose to obfuscate. According to the minister, there are no strip searches in our youth protection centers. Instead, children are asked to remove their clothes, their underwear, put on a towel, get on all fours, and move around to prove they aren't hiding anything on their body. Totally not a strip search. Here's a video of Québec Solidaire's Guillaume Clich-Rivard grilling the minister.
Au meilleur de votre connaissance, là, combien il y a eu de fouilles à nu en centre jeunesse l'année passée? J'aimerais ça que vous me disiez, selon vous. Là.
Aucune.
Aucune?
La directive a été envoyée en juillet 2025.
OK. Puis, des fouilles à nu, c'est ce qu'on appelle officiellement dans le jargon de Santé Québec maintenant des fouilles complètes, là, on se comprend? C'est différent, mais on en demande à un enfant d'enlever ses vêtements, d'enlever ses sous-vêtements. Il se place sous une serviette, là. Et puis ensuite, on lui demande de lever ses bras, de se tourner. C'est de ça qu'on parle. Ça a toujours été de ça qu'on parle. Dans le cahier de crédit, ça dit qu'il y en a eu 3000 des fouilles comme ça de jeunes mineurs en centre jeunesse. Près de 3000 l'année passée, monsieur le ministre.
If strip searches are supposed to be an exceptional measure, why are we subjecting 3,000 kids to them each year? Here to speak with us about the issue is our very own Marie-Élaine Guay. In addition to her expertise as a political columnist, Marie-Élaine is also a survivor of Quebec's youth protection centers. Feel free to answer in French, Marie-Élaine, but how was kid jail? Was it a good time?
Ouais, j'ai juste des bons souvenirs de mon passage dans la DPJ et la protection de la jeunesse.
Parfait. Il y avait ton intérêt à cœur tout au long du processus.
Oui, puis tu sais, on m'a vraiment donné plein d'outils après pour avoir une vie sociale saine, des perspectives d'emploi. Non, c'était l'enfer. Non. C'est un cauchemar. Ces endroits-là sont littéralement des cauchemars. C'est des institutions qui sont détrimentaires pour les enfants.
Quand c'est rendu qu'il faut faire... ou l'attitude du gouvernement, c'est, regarde, il faut faire des fouilles à nu. Ouais. Il faut absolument encadrer les jeunes avec des punitions je pense, qui incluent mettre l'enfant en isolement.
Mm-hmm. La contention.
Oui.
La contention qui est la méthode pour tenir un enfant, pour l'amener dans la salle d'isolement.
Est-ce que, selon toi, tous ces comportements, ou toute la structure du gouvernement qu'on impose sur est-ce que ça les aide?
Écoute, il y a des enfants, en fait, la majorité des enfants qui sont placés avec la DPJ, en centre jeunesse ou en foyer de groupe ou en famille d'accueil, sont des enfants qui sont là pour la protection de la jeunesse et qui ne sont pas des jeunes contrevenants. Et c'est différent. Il y a une majorité d'enfants qui sont là pour leur protection. Mais le traitement qui est réservé, général à tout le monde en centre jeunesse, est le même pour les 2 catégories d'enfants qui s'y trouvent. Puis c'est là que, oui, on peut critiquer ça, oui, on peut parler de comment c'est terrible, les fouilles à nu, mais je pense qu'il faut aller plus loin puis se demander si c'est pas juste terrible d'avoir des prisons pour les enfants.
Oui.
C'est ça qui est drôle quand on parle d'abolition puis de réforme, c'est juste qu'on veut améliorer les conditions dans un endroit où les conditions sont inadmissibles.
On essaie de réformer quelque chose qui c'est un peu irréformable.
Exact.
L'idée de prendre un enfant, de le mettre je veux pas dire une cage, mais ça y ressemble un peu.
Ce sont des cellules. Les chambres dans les centres jeunesse sont des cellules avec, qui se barrent de l'extérieur.
OK.
Avec des petites lorgnettes pour que le gardien de nuit ou l'intervenant, l'intervenante puisse attester de ton bien-être la nuit, mettons, quand tu dors. Ce sont des endroits où tous tes mouvements sont gérés par quelqu'un. Fait qu'il y a des transitions pour se déplacer de pièce en pièce, en groupe. C'est pas des endroits où on soigne des jeunes, où on en prend soin, où il y a, je veux dire, il y a des intervenants plus gentils que d'autres, mais c'est quoi un intervenant gentil dans une prison pour enfants, au final, tu sais? C'est ça que je parle dans ma chronique de cette semaine pour The Rover, c'est, OK, on peut parler des fouilles à nu. Je suis vraiment contente que quelqu'un du parti de gauche Québec solidaire adresse ça. En fait, M. Clich-Rivard a fait un bon travail de le marteler à l'Assemblée nationale, mais ça demeure que ces endroits-là ne devraient pas exister. C'est pas comme ça qu'on prend soin des enfants qui ont été victimes de violences, des enfants qui grandissent dans des situations économiques inacceptables dans une
souvent,
société.
Souvent, le crime qu'ils ont commis, c'est juste le crime d'être pauvre.
Ouais, puis on n'a pas aidé leurs parents aussi. Tu sais, je veux dire, les conditions matérielles des enfants sont celles de leurs parents. Puis l'égalité des chances est une propagande qu'on est... Tu sais, je pense que les gens sont de moins en moins dupes par rapport à la supposée méritocratie et tout ça. Oui. Quand ta vie commence, ton adolescence commence ou se termine dans une prison pour enfants, c'est quoi tes perspectives d'avenir? Tu sais, je veux dire, tu sors de là, on t'inscrit pour le bien-être social, qui est même pas assez pour te payer un loyer, puis on te dit, comme tous les autres enfants, tu vas faire ton chemin dans la société capitaliste, puis tu vas être capable, si tu travailles fort, là, tu vas l'avoir ta maison à Boucherville. Comme, c'est un peu... Je trouve que c'est rendu risible qu'on parle pas de ces affaires-là en termes de la pauvreté qui dessine nos sociétés. Tu sais.
Mais c'est de la violence. C'est de décider qu'un certain pourcentage de la population, c'est un sacrifice acceptable qu'on peut faire pour le bien du reste de la société. On va les garder en bas. Ça fait au-dessus de 20 ans que tu n'es plus en centre de jeunesse. Est-ce que tu retiens encore des souvenirs dans ton corps? Est-ce que ça y a-tu des habitudes que tu as pris là-bas qui ont resté avec toi? How do you deal with it 20 years later?
Ben, c'est drôle parce que j'ai commencé à en parler dans les 5 dernières années à peu près de mon passé dans les centres de jeunesse. En fait, pendant longtemps, c'était quelque chose dont j'avais honte. Mm-hmm. Je suis sûre qu'il y a plein de monde que vous connaissez qui sont passés par la DPJ puis vous le saurez jamais parce que c'est comme un truc genre... Mais la honte n'est pas sur moi d'avoir été là. La honte est sur la société de ne pas avoir pris soin d'une enfant en difficulté.
Ça a pris combien de temps pour que tu réalises ça?
Ça fait pas même longtemps que je l'ai réalisé. Non. Mais la propagande est forte, que c'est ta faute, que c'est la faute de l'individu, mettons. Puis, à ce jour, je peux pas dormir la porte de la chambre fermée. Je dois garder la porte ouverte. Je me rappelle des transitions. Les transitions, ça me hante. Puis ça hante mon chum Phil aussi, qui a passé par les centres jeunesse. Les deux, on s'en parle souvent comme les maudites transitions. Genre, OK, on monte aux chambres. Tout est régi à la lettre. T'sais. Je peux pas avoir de patron, moi, dans la vie. À cause de ça, j'ai un... En fait, envoyer des gens en centre jeunesse, soit ça les tue après d'overdose, ou soit ils se partent des balados de gauche puis deviennent des dissidents.
Oui. Non, mais regarde, on s'est rencontrés il y a peut-être 1 an et demi. Mm-hmm. Puis j'ai lu beaucoup de tes anciens textes, tes anciens balados. Puis tu avais parlé de une de tes amies dans le centre jeunesse qui est disparue. Puis
j'ai 3 amis la même année, entre 99 et 2000. Mon amie Tania Pinette, qui a été une jeune femme autochtone qui a été assassinée par son partenaire à l'âge de 14 ans. On était à l'Escale ensemble, en centre jeunesse. J'ai une autre amie, Pascal Paré, qui, une semaine ou 2 après qu'elle soit sortie de centre jeunesse à 18 ans, a été portée disparue. On ne l'a jamais retrouvée. La SQ, sa fiche est encore sur le site de la SQ. Et mon autre amie, Marianne, qui, la journée de ses 18 ans, donc la journée qu'elle pouvait quitter le centre jeunesse, s'est pendue derrière le centre jeunesse L'Escale à Cap-Rouge, à Québec. Puis ça, c'est des réalités pour les jeunes qui fréquentent ces centres-là. Il y en a très peu qui se ramassent à avoir des vies décentes et enrichies. La plupart finissent très, très mal.
Si Ouais, c'est sidérant comme... excuse-moi, non, mais
Non, mais c'est
ça
correct.
t'assomme parce que c'est...
Il faut qu'on en parle.
Oui.
Genre, il faut qu'on en parle. Puis comme le fait que dans Rover, je peux parler de ces affaires-là, puis qu'on sorte un peu de l'espèce de dichotomie, genre, t'aurais pu t'en sortir si t'avais fait un effort et il n'y a rien à faire avec ces jeunes-là. Il y a un middle ground qu'on peut trouver en leur donnant des conditions matérielles, des conditions, là, je parle de conditions financières.
Ouais.
On est dans une crise du logement historique. Ces jeunes-là sortent du centre jeunesse et n'ont nulle
C'est
part
la
où
rue.
aller. C'est un enfant sur 3 de la DPJ qui se retrouve à la rue, qui vit un épisode d'itinérance visible dans sa vie, visible.
Ouais.
Parce que souvent, il
Il y
se
a du
promène d'appart.
couchsurfing, oui,
Exact. Souvent, il quitte la province aussi, il se ramasse à Vancouver, il se ramasse en Alberta, il se ramasse à Toronto, parce qu'il n'y a pas d'aide au Québec, tu sais, ils partent sur le pouce. C'est des vies, genre, brisées à jamais. Puis l'idée même de vouloir empêcher des fouilles à nu, c'est ne pas adresser que ces endroits-là devraient être burned to the ground,
Oui.
honnêtement.
C'est ce que je trouve intéressant dans tout ça, c'est que premièrement, on a un gouvernement qui veut même pas financer les hôpitaux, tu sais, ça coupe dans l'éducation, puis au fédéral tant qu'au provincial.
Pour mettre de l'argent dans l'armée, là.
Oui, exactement, oui, absolument, tu sais. Il faut gagner la guerre froide.
Mais ils vont pouvoir recruter les jeunes dans les centres jeunesse puis
Oui.
les enrôler dans l'armée. Ça va être des bonnes...
Mais c'était un peu la... Si on veut passer à ça, c'est un peu la question, c'est on dirait que ces gens-là réalisent pas que d'une manière économique, ça marche pas non plus. Tu crées une classe de citoyens qui vont probablement se ramasser sur la rue, qui vont avoir beaucoup plus de chances à se ramasser en prison. Là, mettons que c'est la prison provinciale. Tu sais, à Montréal, si tu vas à Bordeaux, la dernière étude qui ont sorti, c'est 2 détenus sur 3 en sortant de Bordeaux vont retourner à l'intérieur de 2 ans.
Ouais.
Ça fait qu'on crée une genre de classe permanente de gens qui sont soit en prison ou soit en prison pour enfants, qui sont soit dans la rue. Puis, il me semble que c'est beaucoup plus cher d'enfermer et de brutaliser les enfants et les pauvres que de créer une société où, OK, peut-être que Max millionnaire a pas 3 piscines, il y en a juste 2, mais OK, un enfant peut manger ou peut avoir une saine vie.
Ben c'est... Quand on parle de pauvreté organisée, là, puis on parle de la chaîne pénale en sociologie là, comme un concept sociétaire, c'est qu'on n'est pas prêt à donner de l'argent aux familles pour qu'elles et ils améliorent leurs conditions, mais on est prêt à dépenser des centaines de milliers de dollars pour mettre des enfants et des gens en prison. C'est extrêmement dispendieux. Tu sais, si on veut voir ça dans un spectre capitaliste, là, c'est bad economics. Là.
Ouais.
Ça sera toujours mieux. Moi, je suis convaincue qu'en donnant un revenu universel à ces enfants-là, quand ils sortent, un revenu minimum universel, un montant, on l'a vu pendant la PCU,
Ouais.
le crime a baissé pendant que les gens avaient accès à la PCU, parce que c'était pas assez, mais c'était suffisant pour subvenir à ses besoins. Je pense que c'est des choses... C'est pas radical de parler de ces choses-là comme des nécessités pour éviter des nouvelles violences physiques et psychologiques dans les familles. Il faut adresser la précarité économique puis la pauvreté. Tu sais, il y a un rapport qui est sorti en 1991 qui s'appelle le rapport du groupe de travail pour les jeunes qui s'appelait « Un Québec fou de ses enfants ». Je sais pas si tu te souviens de ça.
J'avais 6 ans.
J'en parle dans ma chronique. Puis il disait que ce rapport-là rappelait que le bien-être des enfants est indissociable de celui de leurs parents.
Mm-hmm.
Des parents pauvres. Il y a toujours des exceptions. On a tout un ami qui a eu une vie difficile, puis finalement, maintenant, il est avocat, mais je veux dire, c'est pas la majorité des gens, ça. On parle
Puis
d'exceptions.
même le gars qui est sorti puis qui est devenu un avocat, il y a des séquelles.
Mais
Et
oui, bien
souvent,
sûr.
Ça se peut qu'il est très fonctionnel, mais que, tu sais, il y a un trauma dans son corps.
Ben oui.
Puis peut-être qu'il est correct, mais souvent, tu sais, ça se manifeste avec un problème de consommation, ou on travaille tout le temps, ou on n'a pas une réalité, ou on n'a pas un rapport avec la réalité ou avec les autres qui est nécessairement, ou avec soi-même qui est nécessairement saine. Puis je pense que comme tu disais, la honte, le sentiment d'isolement, tu sais, l'idée d'être un enfant puis de te faire... tu sais, tu peux pas aller pisser sans demander la permission à quelqu'un. Tu peux pas... Il y a quelque chose de incroyablement violent là-dedans.
Oui, puis il y a vraiment... je vois, mettons, dans les commentaires sous la publication de M. Clich-Rivard, où il parle avec le ministre Lionel Carman, il y a des commentaires de gens qui sont tellement décomplexés à propos du fait que ces enfants-là sont des victimes. Les gens disent... C'est des enfants criminels, ils rentrent des choses dans les prisons, ils rentrent des fusils, des couteaux, de la drogue, c'est dangereux pour les intervenants. Puis tu te dis, ouais, mais s'il n'y en avait pas de centre jeunesse, alors il n'y en aurait pas de ces problèmes-là. Puis je me dis aussi, il y a la montée de la violence dans les écoles. Est-ce qu'on va se mettre à fouiller à nu tous les enfants? Ça, j'en ai...
29 ou 30% des profs qui disent avoir subi de la violence physique.
Avoir subi de la peur dans leur milieu de travail, de peur d'être attaqués ou violentés. Est-ce qu'on... Non, on ne fouillerait pas les enfants à nu avant qu'ils rentrent à l'école tous les matins. Pourquoi? Parce que dans ce contexte-là, on considère que c'est des enfants. Mais dans les centres jeunesse, on les voit comme des criminels. Puis ça, c'est notre lorgnette sociétaire là-dessus qu'il faut ajuster et non pas ces enfants-là doivent s'ajuster à nous.
Non.
Je veux dire, un enfant qui fait des trucs genre break in a house, consommer de la drogue, se battre, c'est un enfant dont les besoins ne sont pas adressés.
Oui,
il y a
les
quelque
choses
chose qui
vont
va
pas bien dans ta vie quand tu te bats avec un autre enfant, quand tu voles quelque chose, quand tu amènes un couteau à l'école. C'est pas une vie d'un enfant. Je switcherais pas de place avec cet enfant-là. Puis je pense que pour les gens dans les commentaires qui disent qu'ils ont toutes sortes d'affaires haineuses à dire à propos des enfants. Premièrement, j'espère qu'ils n'ont pas des enfants eux-mêmes, probablement qu'ils en ont. Puis en même temps, on dirait que c'est plus facile haïr un enfant que tu n'as jamais rencontré, dont les circonstances sont carrément un mystère à toi. C'est plus facile d'haïr un enfant que de penser à un monde où les choses pourraient être différentes.
Mais tu sais, je veux pas faire des drôles de parallèles puis faire des hyperboles non plus, là, mais on a un génocide live stream devant nos yeux depuis 3 ans. On déshumanise les enfants palestiniens depuis 3 ans non-stop sur Internet. On a une société qui se fascise en même temps. Toutes ces choses-là arrivent à niveau, arrivent à point pour être dans le punitif. Une société qui se fâchise, c'est aussi une société qui rend tout un peu plus dans la punition. Fait que moi, je pense littéralement qu'il faut revoir comment on traite la dissidence dans nos sociétés. Oui. Même, on voit de la répression au niveau des manifs aussi. On voit, tu sais, là, je vais un petit peu à l'écart de ce qu'on veut parler. Mais pour moi, tout ça est cohérent ensemble.
La seule instance gouvernementale ou la seule agence gouvernementale qui semble recevoir plus d'argent à chaque année, peu importe ce qu'ils ont fait, peu importe comment leur job a fonctionné, peu importe ce que les statistiques disent.
Combien d'enfants ils ont tués?
La police.
La police.
Ils reçoivent toujours plus d'argent.
Ouais.
Mais il faut aller dire aux profs, je sais pas, tu sais, à moins que tu arrives avec un gun. Non, mais je sais pas, tu sais. On peut pas, il faut que tu achètes, il faut que toi-même cette année tu achètes les cahiers à tes élèves, ou il faut que tu fasses du surtemps, temps supplémentaire gratuit, ou il faut que tu fasses de la surveillance gratuite. Je le sais, là-dessus, on est capable, sur nos propres enfants, surtout les pauvres qui vont à l'école publique, parce qu'on a vraiment un système à 3 vitesses.
Absolument.
C'est correct. Eux peuvent faire des sacrifices énormes qu'on demanderait pas, qu'on n'accepterait jamais dans notre propre vie. Mais de penser à une société où peut-être, tu sais, on pourrait remplacer la moitié des policiers avec des travailleurs sociaux. Non, ça. On peut pas penser à ça, c'est fou.
Mais la police est même récompensée quand elle dépasse son budget, parce que quand elle dépasse son budget, elle dit, mais c'est parce qu'on n'en avait pas assez, puis il est bonifié d'année en année à Longueuil, à Montréal, à Gatineau, à Québec, c'est la même affaire. On est dans une montée de l'intolérance, mais aussi dans une montée de la surveillance. Et les enfants surveillés en centre jeunesse, ça va juste causer des adultes dysfonctionnels.
Oui.
Puis, tu sais, 3000 fouilles à nu par année, oui, c'est alarmant, mais c'est alarmant le nombre de centres et de jeunes qui sont incarcérés au Québec. Je trouve que c'est un des plus gros angles morts de la gauche. J'étais à la balado de Max Richard il y a 2 semaines, puis je le disais, là, les prisons pour enfants, c'est le plus gros angle mort qu'on a à gauche, qu'il faudrait adresser. Puis c'est pour ça que j'étais très fière de Guillaume Clich-Rivard d'adresser ça. Oui. Mais en même temps, même lui, quand il en parle, il dit « Certains ou la plupart, en tout cas presque tous ces enfants-là, sont là pour être protégés. » C'est même un enfant qui commet un crime est en centre jeunesse pour être protégé.
Mais là, pour comme boucler la boucle, le Guillaume Clich-Rivard, Québec solidaire, toute la classe politique, il y a tellement une emphase sur, pas le contenu du message, mais la forme. Il faut être poli. Il faut faire semblant
Tu parles de respectabilité en ce moment.
Oui,
Ok.
oui, il faut être respectable. Puis souvent, c'est la critique qu'on va faire de toi, c'est que, hey, tu te chicanes avec des gens, c'est toujours un débat, t'as vraiment une personnalité caustique en ligne.
Les gens disent ça de moi, tu me l'apprends.
Hey,
Je pensais que j'étais admirée de tous.
Je regrette de te dire. Fuck. T'es sur une coupe de liste. Mais moi aussi, fait que c'est pour ça qu'on est amis. Mais je te dis ça parce que souvent, tu vas faire une sortie, puis je me dis, OK, la forme est un peu intense. Puis peut-être que je l'aurais pas dit de même. Puis peut-être que j'aurais pas eu un argument avec une telle ou un tel. Mais en même temps, t'arrives avec une perspective qu'on voit presque pas dans les médias. Je peux penser à peut-être une autre personne, puis on la connaît, qui a comme eu un difficile parcours pour se vraiment comme similaire à la tienne. Puis c'est pas une perspective qu'on voit dans les médias de gens qui ont été en dedans, de gens qui ont tu sais, que ça sont presque devenus une statistique, puis de toujours insister sur la politesse, sur la respectabilité versus, disons, les vraies crises de choses. C'est une des raisons pour laquelle je t'admire tellement comme ami, puis je suis tellement fier que tu contribues au Rover, puis je suis tellement heureux que tu sois venu sur le show pour me forcer à parler un peu plus de français.
J'adore quand tu parles français. Tu parles très bien français, d'ailleurs.
Oh, merci. Ma grand-mère qui est plus avec nous, elle serait vraiment heureuse d'entendre ça.
Ginette?
Jacqueline.
Ah,
Jacqueline,
ouais,
je suis à
c'est vrai,
l'IFO.
c'est Jackie.
Jackie, attends. Jackie.
Ah ouais. That's
We're not
journalism.
supposed to. Yeah, exactly.
Mais, OK, je t'entends. Par contre, en ce moment, avec la montée des intolérances, la répression, moi, je pense que ma manière de m'exprimer, ma manière d'être, c'est une autre façon de montrer que je care. C'est peut-être pas la manière qui est la plus respectable, mais c'est nécessaire parce que quand on est sans embâche, puis qu'on prend la parole, puis qu'on dit des choses que personne dit ou qu'on les dit plus fort que les autres, ça permet à ceux qui sont un petit peu plus smooth en arrière de prendre leur air d'aller avec nous puis d'avancer pour des conditions matérielles égales pour tous et toutes. Puis je pense que c'est plus le temps de... Je veux dire, je vais toujours rester poli puis genre dans le respect, mais c'est pas vrai que je vais pas parler du systémique puis du structurel. On est ailleurs en ce moment. Il faut commencer à nommer les choses par leur nom. Puis tu sais, moi, ça me dérange pas de pas faire l'unanimité tant que la cause avance. C'est selfless, cette affaire-là. J'en ai rien à crisser, genre, que du monde dans les médias mainstream me trouve trop intense. Moi, je trouve qu'eux autres, ils sont gênants.
Oui.
Fait que, tu sais,
Oui.
je veux dire, de faire toute la perspective de la police, des patrons, des entrepreneurs, à un moment donné, ça prend du monde à gauche qui parle pour le peuple. Fait que ça, c'est ça que je me suis donné comme mission.
In 2019, Justin Trudeau said that the way Canada treated Indigenous women amounted to a genocide. 7 years later, in Montreal, a group of international experts are being asked to consider that genocide more broadly. From May 25th to 29th, the Daphne Arts Centre played host to the Permanent Peoples Tribunal. It's an international human rights body that's been around since the 1970s, a permanent court of opinion that hears cases of state violence, colonization, and genocide when other bodies won't. In this case, the focus was on 3 broad areas: disappeared and missing children, unmarked graves, and forced sterilizations. Now, we're filming this before a preliminary decision has been reached, but it's likely this panel will issue a finding of genocide, as the tribunal has before. But what is going to come from that decision? And why relive these stories? Why unearth these traumas when Canada has seen commission after commission, report after report, long fought for settlement after settlement, and still survivors say the underlying system doesn't change? Let's talk about it.
None of this is binding, right? The People's Tribunal probably won't materially change anything, so why do it?
Yeah, that is a good question. And that's the kind of question that journalists were asking the folks at the Native Women's Shelter. This is the organization that called for the People's Tribunal, supported by some other NGOs. I talked to Nakuzet, who's the director there, and she said she was fed up that we've had these other commissions, we've had these reports, like, we know this stuff. But at the same time, people who are Indigenous, whether they're survivors or allies or just affected by the traumatic events that happen in this country, people are saying like there's not enough change. And to be fair to her, there's a lot to back this up. Like, we had the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which ended in 2015. There were 94 calls to action. And according to groups that track this, only about 15 of those were ever actually seen through. And in Toronto, there's the Yellowhead Institute. This is an Indigenous think tank at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University. They actually stopped tracking the progress back in 2023 because they just said, like, there's no point. It's so slow. We are doing these reports year after year, and like, we're kind of wasting paper. We're wasting ink here. There's the Vienne Commission here in Quebec.
Yeah.
It's about systemic racism in Indigenous people's access to public services. There was a report last year that basically said, like, there's not enough buy-in from the government here to actually make the kind of change that's needed to implement these calls to action. The missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, it's just like the same stuff there. It's not calls to action. It's, I think, calls for justice. But again, the government will say we've made this much progress. I think they say like 136 of the calls for justice we've made progress on. But then you get outside observers saying, well, you only actually finished 2 of those. Yeah. And the progress you're talking about, I mean, in some cases, it's minimal. It's less than you guys are saying.
Yeah. You've opened the file. You've looked at the file. Technically, that's progress.
Oh my gosh, and we have a guest here.
Yes, we have a guest cat. Who
so awesome.
Well, he knows when things are heavy to come by and be
and lighten the mood a little bit. Yeah,
lighten it just a bit. Something that, like, 11 years ago when Trudeau was elected and Big Bad Stephen Harper was sent back into the political wilderness, I remember a real, like, there were even some Indigenous communities that were like, I don't generally vote, but I might vote for this guy. There was such a message of hope. And then you saw, like, a lot of kind of purely symbolic, like, there were real changes, right? The promise to finally resolve access to clean drinking water, although I believe he promised he would solve it in 1 year, and it's been 11 and it isn't fully solved yet.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Well, let's just not talk about it, okay? I think that's we'll do the land acknowledgement, but we're not going to do anything about the land. Like, I want to say that this land, it's like we're looking for this, like, if we say the right words in the right order, we'll be fine. But if we actually have to make any kind of material concession, or if we have to give anything up or do any real work, then, like, no, we don't want to do it. Like, why?
Yeah, to be fair, people will always say, well, there were billions in settlements, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a kind of side of the population that's saying, like, why are you asking for more?
Yeah.
Like, the commissions have been done, the work has been done. And, on the other side, you go to something like the Permanent Peoples Tribunal where, I mean, I just stopped by on Monday morning. I didn't stay for the whole 4 or 5 days. But, what you're hearing from the people there is like, well, the work is just starting.
Yes.
And what's interesting to me is I think there's kind of a broad-based consensus that the TRC created in Canada, but then everything from that point has been fractured a little bit, where it's like, okay, we did reconciliation, this is what it looked like, or it's ongoing, we have a vision for it, and, there's going to be people who are saying, we push for more. Now, with this kind of exercise, where it is a court of opinion, it's not a court of law, it's not tied to any state, it's not tied to an international court, it is civilian, right? Like, there's only so much they can do.
One of the things that, like, I guess we shouldn't be surprised by it, but it is so strong, is the backlash against the idea that so many children died while in the not only the, like you could start with residential schools, the residential school system, but you see it with the 60 scoop survivors. Nagu said is a 60 scoop survivor. And you see it with kids in foster care today. Like, there are conditions that are killing these kids. They're dying in care. Their lives are so much worse than had they not been in care. And it seems like people are trying to use something like, well, there wasn't one giant mass grave with a bunch of bones and, like, a note from the government that says we did this. Well, until that has happened or been found, then none of this is real. What's your sense of what's energizing that movement, and how widespread that movement is?
I mean, I think you know better than me, Chris, because you covered this kind of stuff more, and you actually covered the TRC, right?
I did,
back in the day. Yeah, I do want to say it's something that I think there's a lot of kind of nuance to it, because there's a National Post article that came out this week. The headline was 5 years after Kamloops' grave announcement, not a single confirmed burial site has been found. Here's what we know. And it's going over, some of these GPR, ground penetrating radar cases, where they said, look, this looks like there are a bunch of graves that were unmarked outside of an Indian residential school. And what the article is saying is basically like, well, these graves were never unearthed. They were never dug up. So the tone of it, the underlying tone, really does read to me as casting doubt.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because they'll say things like, well, the initial reporting talked about mass graves, but there weren't mass graves. There was a mass of individual graves.
Yeah.
And that's true, but it's kind of like, okay, is it really like...
Is that the point? Why are we splitting hairs over the wording of it when the reality is, I believe the number is at least 4,000 children died during the residential school.
Yeah, I think
era.
the TRC said something like they estimated like 6,000. Yeah. But, in my world, I don't really know anybody who envisions it as a mass grave.
Yeah.
I don't know what the importance of that is in shaping the narrative. But the article itself is really interesting because at the end they say, Indian residential schools, they caused all these harms, and they quote survivors and they talk about the sexual abuse and stuff like that. But it's just interesting, I think, this place we're in the dialogue where it's like, okay, that reconciliation era, I don't know, to what extent is it just like over and dead? And what has come after, which is a sort of acknowledgement of the facts on the ground that the TRC produced, but then it's like this discursive war for what comes next, right?
Yeah.
Is it going to be reparations? Is it going to be this funding that is looking for more grave sites that people are critiquing the way it's being spent by nations, whereas the nations are saying like, we're afraid of this funding going away in the next few years.
Yeah.
We've heard that it might sunset soon. And it's just like, it's interesting because, so I almost wish that the PPT had more eyes on it. And
the tribunal.
Yeah. Because it's like, you can watch the live stream, but there's no recordings of the full sessions that are saved. So you kind of have to be there or watch it. It's a limited room. It's a small place in the Mile End. It's like an art gallery. And, when these citizen tribunals were really kind of potent is when they were getting society's eyes on them. Like, there was a tribunal by Bertrand Russell, this analytic philosopher who I believe was at Oxford, who came with Jean-Paul Sartre and de Beauvoir and like did this tribunal on the Vietnam War that got all this media attention. So in the past, these kinds of tribunals they've been spectacular, and maybe there's a sense of like not wanting to bring spectacle to something that is like so serious and grave. We're talking about genocide here, right? Like that is what they're trying to get the tribunal to declare, is that there was an intent to destroy by the state actor of Canada. And it just, it makes me wonder, like, okay, if we get this decision, right, where is it going to go from there? Canada has said, we are not participating. Yeah. And to an extent, you can kind of understand, like, they don't want to give up their sovereignty over the process here. It's like, we decide when there's commissions and when there's tribunals or international courts, something that states are privy to. It's reputationally, perhaps they fear, more harmful for them to mount a defense of something that is indefensible.
Yeah.
So right now at the PPT, there's this empty chair that is symbolizing their absence. And it's like, that empty chair is a really powerful symbolic gesture. Like it shows something, I think, that a lot of Indigenous people feel. Like the state is absent here. No matter what they say, no matter what they do, the state is absent. But it's like, who is seeing that? right?
Yeah.
Like, who knows that chair is empty and what that means? And I want to hear from you, because I know you did so much reporting. You've done so much reporting. The rover has gone to small communities. You were there for the TRC. Like, is this your sense of like actually talking to people in the community that they feel this way as well? Or is there maybe more diversity of opinion than the way I'm presenting it?
Well, I mean, you have so many cases of, like, each case is individual, right? There's patterns that emerge, but everyone's going to have a different reaction to how they want to heal, or how they want to have what they went through recognized. But I think the takeaway I got, like, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came to Montreal in 2013, I was at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel, and I followed up, and I've done a lot of work with survivors over the years, and it's all different, right? The experiences there are similarities, but everyone kind of has their own baggage. And like, I mean, there are people to this day who, like, when they go to sleep at night, they remember, like, one person I know, they saw another kid just get killed in front of them and buried. They lost a sibling to another who's at another residential school. They died, body was never returned home. It's a wound that'll never, ever get closed. And it's a wound that gets passed down to your children and their children. And I think a big part of it is they don't want symbolic, they want like recognition, and they don't want it to feel like it's a box that's being checked off and then relegated to history, because everyone who's experienced it and their children, this is something that lives in your body, or this is something that, because of an absence in your life, or because of like, it's that too. And what I've seen from the kind of denialist movement, you know, the John Kays of the world, is that it's a kind of, I think the survivors that I've spoken to, when you talk to them about that, it's like they almost take the people who deny it almost take like a sick joy, or like, I gotcha, like, see, there wasn't one mass grave, so therefore this whole thing, like, it's like they're looking for a loophole that they can hang their hat on and say, see, Canada's not that bad. And it's this weird thing where they can't, I'm sorry, I'm going on and on because I have like a lot of thoughts about this, but it's like a lot of Canadians can't, when you criticize the country and the country's history and the country's founders, it's like you're personally criticizing those people. And it's like their identity is so linked to this thing that, like, we all want something that's larger than ourselves in this world. And when you show people the truth, it kind of shatters that image and that thing that they believe in, and you get such a visceral response. And I think people, like, oh man, I haven't even come close to answering your question, but
no, but it's interesting because it's like, I think nobody likes to feel shame, right?
Yeah.
And what I find interesting on that side of it, right? Those people will look and they'll point at kind of settler allies about, like, they'll find people who engage and over-engage in the rhetoric of reconciliation, land acknowledgements, things like that. They'll say, that's ridiculous. And, I think we also have to take that side of it seriously.
Yeah.
Is like, they're saying this performative aspect of it is ridiculous. It's a bit ridiculous. It's a bit necessary. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Like, it's anybody's guess, right?
Well, I've heard someone say, look, I appreciate the thought behind it. I appreciate the idea that, like, you want to take a moment and say, this is history. But it is performative. And it is like, I want to take a moment to recognize that this is happening on unceded Haudenosaunee territory. And it's like the next sentence is always like, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I've said it. That's all I need to do. I've checked off that box. We can relegate it to the past and move towards the future and build pipelines, and and everybody's happy and it'll be fine.
But do you think if they changed their rhetoric and said, like, well, actually Canada is about, like, redress, it is about building building better together, you know?
Yeah,
It's all these things. That's what the flag means. The flag means like everybody is included. Everybody has this quality of life. You know, like I think you could build a broad-based movement around that. I actually think you maybe need to if you're a politician. Like, it's kind of like do or die, right? Because nihilism and guilt and shame are not going to win you any votes. Like, it's just not a winning strategy. And maybe that's part of the reason why these things get sidelined, or just that they're very difficult, intractable, multifaceted problems. But also even talking about them in that way is just like, okay, it's defeatist and it's not true. But then it's like you listen to people's testimony at this tribunal. I listened in to a panel on forced sterilizations, and it's like extremely heartbreaking stuff. There was a new report that came out just this week in Quebec that said, like, okay, there is a marked disparity between the way that Indigenous and non-Indigenous women are treated in the healthcare system, in you know, especially like in giving birth. And they said there's a power imbalance between these Indigenous women and healthcare providers, so that it's impossible for these women to give free, prior, and informed consent. They talked about, like, you know, women who gave consent 2 days later after having their tubes tied. In this panel, there were women who were saying, like, you know, it happened, the doctors told me it was reversible. I didn't even, some gave consent, some didn't, right? But they were lied to. And then it's this trauma that they continue with. Like, one woman was saying that she kept having dreams or feeling like she was pregnant, right? This was like for over a year after this happened, because her mind and her body just couldn't accept what had happened to her. And, you know, it's like, I think I have a hard time thinking of, like, truly anybody who hears that kind of stuff, who is able to say, you're lying, that didn't happen to you, you're wrong, right? It's hard to do. So I don't really know what the answer is here. I think it's tricky, because the exercise of having a tribunal like this, it raises a lot of questions, right? It's like, who do you want to listen, and to what? And, you know, it's a balance that I think the people behind it weighed very strongly, of like getting people to air their trauma and their testimonies. I mean, I talked to a guy who was an Indian residential school survivor. He says that he was sexually assaulted there by 2 men, but he also said, like, this is my opportunity to share, to help others, to show a story of healing. Like, he said it's valuable to take part in this, right? So, yeah, you know, there's going to be some report, there's going to be the decision that gets rendered, and maybe you look at that and you say, this is just one more document. Like, the TRC was 5 years, this thing is 5 days. Like, there's obviously a different scale here. But from what I understand from the people who are taking part, who are putting this on, it's like, you know, you're at the end of your rope. You're trying whatever you can to get people's eyes on this, because it's like, the journalists will pay attention when there's a new report. But I mean, you would know better than anybody, like, having worked in mainstream media, like a big post media paper, and now running your own outlet, it's like the media craves newness. And what do you do with a story that just keeps going and going and going?
And you become, weirdly, the audience becomes desensitized to it. Like, you hear enough of these stories and it's weird. You can kind of, like, you get a little numb to it. And that's frightening.
And it's like, it's built into the media itself, right? Your editor will say something like, oh, well, if this didn't happen, like, you know, are people going to care?
Maybe we're not going to do another story about this. There's not many developments. It's still just poor, shitty, whatever. The word genocide, I think people struggle with it because we think it has to be the Holocaust, or it has to be something where it's just very clear, it's systematic, it's irrefutable. But I think when we talk about, there is a clear definition of genocide, and there's like elements of it that I think if you look at Canada, you can't deny that this has happened. So I don't know if you can run through some of the like, what are the benchmarks, or what are the you know, what has to happen for you to say, okay, well, a genocide or some kind of attempt at a genocide has happened here.
Yeah, I think this is like the 1948 Geneva Convention and then the Rome Statute. I don't want to get too much into the international like gobbledygook here, but there is an intent to destroy that's necessary for genocide.
Like a population in part or in whole.
Killing, bodily harm, I think destructive conditions. It's forcibly taking children. And then the last one is stopping births.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sterilizing.
Basically. And it's like you run through that list. You run through that list and you're like, well, shit. I mean, the issue, though, is, you know, whether you believe it or not, it's like it's looking at a historic set of circumstances and conditions. And I think it's one thing to make a genocide argument about the way that Canada has treated Indigenous peoples, but often where there ends up being pushback is then its contemporary sort of instantiation. Like the way that these things have been reproduced historically. So in 2019, when Justin Trudeau said that the way Canada had treated missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls amounted to a genocide, two of the old white guy genocide voices in this country, Romeo Dallaire and Irwin Cotler, like two of the big names in the room, were both like, this is not right. They thought that minimized the definition of genocide because they said, like, this is unconscionable what's happening, but the intent to destroy for them was not there. And I think that's...
But it's all over, like, the government documents, right? Like, killing the child or killing the Indian to save the child. It's in the way we separate the families. It's in the way we take the children. It's in the way that we've allocated this territory that doesn't belong to us. But you see, that's the more expansive definition that the PPT is looking at. This was, I think, a more narrow subject matter. So they were able to point at it and say, like, it doesn't meet the standards for us. So I think what the PPT is trying to do is say, like, we haven't had like a real, I think, broad-based acknowledgement that a genocide occurred, and that's what they're trying to get at. It's just like rethinking the approach to this problem, because like right now we do have these names in the room who are like, this is not a genocide, and it's not the right people necessarily who are getting the attention to make that call or who are setting the agenda for what's being spoken about. Well, I really appreciate that you took the time to go and that you came on the show, and thanks for talking about this.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.